Or not. So my name is Mike Campbell. I am one of the workshop assistants in the Center for Creativity. As I just said, I put this together with the thought of being able to do this at home. Mostly I used black t-shirts, but I also did use duck cloth. You can use any dark fabric as long as it is natural fibers. So you want to use cotton. If possible, polyester will not work. I have some curtains that are blackout curtains, or blackout fabric for blackout curtains. It did not take to the dye at all because it's all synthetic. So yeah, you just need a natural dark fabric. It doesn't need to be black. Black will get you this sort of tan tone that you see when you accidentally bleach something black. But most other colored fabrics will get you just a washed out version of that color.
Can you use denim, like jeans or shorts?
Yeah, it's all natural. So yeah, you should be able to use this with denim. Just always experiment. So the first thing I will say is fabrics will react different because of the way that they are woven. So just keep that in mind, that something that I did with all of this was try and make sure I'm using as little bleach as possible for the first layers for everything, just so I was sure that it wasn't going to bleed in any way. So I am going to switch this one to the main view. There we go. Hopefully you're able to see anything. Just anyone let me know at any point if something is off camera, because I am going to leave this other monitor here and I will not be able to see myself for a minute. Also, let me know if you can't hear. Actually, what I'm going to do, put this over here, because I think I have my speaker through my computer. Okay, so we're gonna start with the tie-dyeing because I think that might be the easiest. So I have this link here for anybody that wants it, but look, that's a private. I want to do everybody, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to do a simple spiral tie-dye here and show you that technique, but there are tons of different tie-dye techniques, and most of them will work as long as it's a two-tone pattern. So I will say that you can get some variety of color depending on how many times you go over it, but especially with the black fabric or the shirts, I had a pretty hard time getting much definition. So there's one really light spot right there that you can kind of see. It's not the easiest thing, but like black is definitely not, cloth, thin cloth is not as easy to get variety with. So just some notes before I start any of this. If you've never used bleach before for anything, make sure that you are using some sort of ventilation. I have a window right in front of me that is open that you can't see. You can do this in your bathroom, in the bathtub or shower, or do it outside if you have a yard. Of course, you want to keep your distance during this time of social distancing. Everything will require some level of preparation or time or waiting. Tie-dye, obviously, you want to let your bleach dry. For everything else, it's just going to be about waiting for other things to dry, or waiting for layers to dry. I'll explain that as we go. So like I said, I tried to improvise for as many things as possible. So I will show you for each different section that I'm doing. We're doing 3 different things here. Tie-dyeing, I'm going to show some batiking with glue and some stenciling, and then sort of just general painting, which isn't too much different than doing a batik, but just wanted to show you some different ways that you could use bleach, as it's something accessible for everybody, hopefully. let's see. So make sure you're not wearing something that is good. If you need gloves, you can wear those, but I am not too worried about the sensitivity of my hands, so I don't have gloves on. And of course, if you are doing this on a carpet or on a surface that might be ruined by the bleach, make sure you're covering that as well, just to make sure that you're not ruining anything in your house or apartment. Just want to keep everybody's stuff nice and neat. Okay. So we'll do, like I said, the tie-dyeing first. So this is just my example that I made. I cut t-shirts in half. So obviously you'll want to do the full t-shirt, which I have a new t-shirt that is not that one, and we will do another version of this spiral. So for tie-dyeing, you will just need shirts, your rubber bands. If you were doing, most methods use rubber bands, but the typical spiral uses rubber bands, so we have them. So what you're doing first is you're always going to pinch from the middle or wherever you want the spiral to be. So if you wanted, you could do the spiral like on the sleeve or closer to the top of the shirt. But typically, people do the spiral in the middle. So I'm just using a pan to catch my bleach. Like I said, if you want to do this in a shower or bathtub or some sort of basin, there's not too much spillage with the bleach as long as you're keeping it controlled. But so what you're going to do is you're going to take both layers of the shirt, front and back, make sure you have them, just twist or pinch it. Again, make sure you have the back layer in this too. And then you're just going to try and keep everything as clean as possible there. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I am just being a perfectionist. Okay, so something like that, whenever you get it done, looks like a nice, strange flower cake. Then you're going to start by rubber banding. Start by quartering it. So if you've never tie-dyed before, what the rubber bands are for is your guide for where the pattern will be. So what I mean by that is, say I was only quartering this, I would do every other, you're doing every other for a typical tie-dye. So, or for a two-tone tie-dye. Typical tie-dye, every single slice of your rubber bands would be a different color. Two-tone, every other one is your other color. So the bleach goes on every other one. So what I mean by that is, you might have some loose. The sleeves are going to always probably need to be touched up. Make sure that you're able to sort of see the spiral there. Just make sure that it hasn't collapsed on top of itself. Let's see if I can here real quick. Helps anybody. Yeah, so you want to make sure you're seeing your center there and that you haven't folded it on top of itself. So you can stop and do 4 if you want. And what you would do is bleach here, but you can keep going. You can do relatively as many as you want. I do not have, so typically you would use like a condiment container to pour this in on, something that has like a nozzle. I just have a bottle of bleach in this little container here, so I will not be doing a lot of very small ones. I'm just going to do so. That. Let me pour some bleach in here real quick. So, my bleach, just have it in a glass jar. So what you're going to do then, like I said, as controlled as possible, you're just going to slowly sort of tilt it on the section you're doing. Again, if we were trying to do a pro way here, we would get some sort of dispenser or dropper so we can have more control over it. You probably don't want to set it down because you will leak some bleach and then you might get somewhere you don't want it. Tip one. Next one. You're going to want to make sure that you are doing the back side of each of those as well. So make sure it's the same one. You bleach on the other side. And you just want to try and get that entire section as saturated as possible. At this point, if you are doing it live with me, you'll probably start to notice your fabric is changing color. This is what we want. So the good thing about bleach compared to typical dye is you don't have to let it set overnight. I would just give it like an hour to settle and soak in, just to make sure all of your layers have gotten covered there. It is folded in on top of itself. But you'll want to make sure then after it's settled for a while that you rinse it out before you wash it, like a typical tie-dye, but it is bleach. You don't want to just throw a bleach-soaked shirt into the washer. You will probably ruin some other things in there, so let it absorb. Let it sort of dry, so this way you don't just rinse all of the bleach onto the rest of the shirt, and then you can rinse that off and throw it in the wash. So this is where we are now. So these are my 4. Obviously, I, again, wasn't perfect. There's some spots that I didn't quite want to get that got covered in the bleach, but I think you can see where the neck of the shirt is. There's some I missed. So go right in here. If you want, you can stick this in a bag or something so this way it doesn't smell up your house or apartment or get all over the place if you're outside and taking it inside. You just want to make sure that none of your bleach is leaking out so that it doesn't get on the other layers whenever you put it in a bag or put it on a surface. All right, so that's pretty much the tie-dye part. If you have questions, you can either unmute yourself, ask them. I don't think anyone's muted right now, but you can also type them out and I can answer them that way as well.
Are you pouring it over the rubber band? I can't tell where you're pouring it.
Pour it in between the rubber.
Oh, in between where the rubber bands are. Okay.
So I'm pouring right on the wedge itself.
Okay, okay.
And as I said, you'll start to see the spots you missed as it goes because start to lighten your shirt. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's all part of the tie-dye experiences. The mistakes will add little bits of color and character to it. So that one obviously has more bleach than this one, but again, this is a typical spiral pattern using the same technique. And eventually we'll uncover it. I'll show you what it looks like in a little bit, but it'll look something like this one. Okay, any questions? So now
Let me ask, sorry, I do have a question. So if we rolled it, you could do tie-dye like ringing, like you ring it out, right? And then put rubber bands on it, or you can do other ways to do tie-dye?
So I posted a link that has some different ways to fold the fabric. But yes, so like if you wanted to do one of the tie-dye where you're pulling from the middle and then you're banding it here. This is just the other one I know off the top of my head. So like this one is for like a striped pattern, but rubber band here. I pull from the center of the shirt, so so this would get you like a line stripe pattern. I could do this. And so the rubber bands, I mean, they hold the shirt together, but they're also the guides for you to tell you where you want to stop doing bleach for every other one. So like if you were doing something like this, you would bleach this first one, skip the second one, bleach that one, and then say I rubber banded it here, you'd bleach that part too. So again, every other one for something like that. Okay. But there's a whole bunch of different methods. So you could try this method. You can, I know that crinkling, just like literally doing whatever with the shirt and pouring in there will give you a pattern. It's been a while since I've hardcore tie-dyed, so I don't remember all the techniques, but yeah, that link has a lot of them on it. And then I will make, whenever we post this video online, I will make an easier version of that infographic, but there were a lot on there, so couldn't get them all translated into something for this. So batik is the next thing we're going to do. So traditionally, batik uses a wax resist, but again, we're doing this in the idea of people that don't have the type of wax you need because it is a softer beeswax. I think it's beeswax paraffin hybrid because paraffin is too hard for batiking and beeswax is too soft. But typically what batiking is you are making patterns on a fabric using a resist, which is again typically the wax, but I'm using just plain white Elmer school glue, which a lot of people probably have somewhere around their house. It works just as, well, not just as well. I won't say that. There are some things that this can't do, but the wax can. So the wax will stay no matter what you put over it. Because we are using bleach, which is very liquidy. I've done this before with paint, with fabric paint, which is a little bit thicker than bleach, of course. But what this can't do is you can't go over this a bunch of times and expect the glue not to wipe away if you're using a brush. So I had an earlier sample that I was working on, but it didn't turn out because I went over it way too many times with the bleach. And of course, because this is plain glue, it rehydrates really easily. So if you go over it a bunch of times with something wet, you're just going to make a bleached glue paste that will fill it all with the fabric. But
yuck.
pretty well as long as you are doing everything slowly, taking your time, and doing it in moderation. So I already put some design on there so I can show you, but I will just now make a design. So of course, you can draw things out beforehand if you want, and then eyeball it, but something that's really useful that hopefully people might have around the house is just chalk. Chalk wipes off the fabric pretty easily, or whenever you wash it, comes out pretty easily. So you can always chalk a pattern onto there before you bleach it. I'm just going to do some random shapes. And then, so in my experimenting, I went over, I poured this out into a container and used a paintbrush to put this on with. And that is where I ran into some trouble because it's not quite thick enough. So just putting it on with the actual dispenser or going over it a couple times if you're painting it on works. I did that as well, and that worked a little better, but you can really just take it. And I will say, much like the batik wax, there's some lack of control, which adds to the charm of a batik piece, especially if you're new. I batiked in high school, so it came out very as messy as this will, because you can see you'll get some splotches where it's a little thicker. Again, all part of the charm here. If you want to be a perfectionist, you just have to take your time, try and squeeze very evenly. But I know not everyone here will probably have an artist's hand about doing things, and that's okay. So again, anywhere you want there to not be bleach is where you will put the glue. So the good thing about white glue is it is water soluble. That's also the negative thing. But what that means is or it is mostly water. So if you wanted to not have to wait, you could always take a hairdryer and help speed up the process of drying the glue. But you don't want to put the bleach on until your glue has dried. So whatever design you are doing, you will want to give it some time. That is why I pre-did some design on this, so this way I could show you just sort of what to do. So if you have paintbrushes, great. If not, I had an old toothbrush, and that is what I have been trying to use for all of this. Obviously, the application won't be as nice as using a paintbrush, but it does work. And just some thoughts and tips about the paintbrush. If you're trying to get a thinner line, try and use like right there, the very tip of the brush, like a paintbrush. And you can get some slightly controlled lines. You don't have to take like the full brush and go like this, like you're brushing the fabric. It's probably actually not what you want to do. Oh, I am tripping. So I will say the one thing with the toothbrush is it does absorb more than a paintbrush will, so you will want to watch some of the drips. But otherwise, again, this is all a slow process. Like I said, you don't want to oversaturate this by pouring a ton of bleach on it because you will probably wipe away a lot of your glue. Like I said, you don't want to do what I was just doing because as you saw, it was kind of pulling the whole fabric. Just be patient. You might not see it develop right away, but it will get there. And for thicker fabrics, it does seem to take longer. When I switch over to the piece I was painting, you'll see that it can take a couple, like a minute or so to actually show up. So let me see if I can put a little more on so you can see what that looks like closer up. Okay. So like I said, this is all a very take your time, slow. You don't want to rush because again, you're going to wipe the glue off if you do. That's probably not the easiest thing to see. Let's see if I can get the light to help it all. Okay, so you can kind of see it. You can see the pattern I did before I started here, but where it's black is where I put the resist. You can kind of see it here. You know, it fades a bit, but it does work. Even though it's not the best translation on camera, I promise you it did resist. And you can sort of see there's a spot, trying to get the best angle here. There's a spot where I went over it a couple times and you can kind of see that it started to seep in. So again, you want to try and be as judicious as possible when applying the bleach, so this way you're not absorbing where you don't want it to and wiping away your glue. But if you have a brush, great, that's probably a lot easier. Or anything that has soft bristles. So this is not the softest brush, so it's not going to be the greatest. Of course, my paintbrushes I have over here, you know, are all soft bristled brushes, so they're all going to work a lot better for this. It's awesome. So I'm going to cheat just to expedite things for my example here, so you can actually see it better. So if you do have a paintbrush, what I would say is get bleach on there, make sure you're not dripping, but just go over as much as possible with one pass, let it dry, go over again. This way you're making sure you don't get too much bleach on there. Like I said, it takes some patience. As you can see, it is just now starting to change. See, if you're doing controlled like this, you can get some color variation with thinner fabric, but it's not going to be as extreme as when we go over to the duck cloth. So for all of this, for anything that's on a t-shirt, if you just want a design on the front, you want to make sure you're backing it with something. Like I said, I cut these t-shirts, but normally you would take your full t-shirt, slide. You can use a piece of cardboard like I did. You can use parchment paper, or I have aluminum foil. Just anything that adds a good barrier in between the two is what you want to use. But for a t-shirt, you don't have to tape the back. I just did that so this way it was tight and I had a good surface. But with a t-shirt, if you want, you can, you know, fold the t-shirt around the back of it and tape it, but you don't have to. And you are probably only working on one t-shirt at a time and not moving around like me, so that's another reason why I, you know, did it this way. So that's what it's starting to look like as we go. So of course, if I were doing this whole thing, I would paint, you know, the entire thing with the bleach. I would probably also make more patterns, so this way there wasn't so much bleach space and there was more line work happening. So you can sort of do it like a Zentangle, where you are, you know, doing a whole bunch of patterns in different shapes. Really with the batiking, you can do whatever you want. If you look at a lot of batiking, it is patterns, but also you can do like a character design, like what this is. So like this has an entirety of a face, a random mouth. These were the eyes. I smushed them, so they don't look as nice as they did. But hopefully you can kind of start to see the character that is appearing there. You can always make the lines thicker too. They don't have to be super thin lines. That is just my style when I do this. So the other thing you can do on t-shirts, I mean, you could do it on any fabric too, is use a stencil. So I used parchment paper and masking tape for my stencil. I have an X-Acto knife. Any sort of like box cutter or fine knife you can use, as long as you have a surface to cut it on. I have a cutting mat. Just make sure you're not cutting your tables with whatever you're doing it on. I drew out a stencil first, and so I will say parchment paper does not take too well to the tape, but what I did was I will show you on this shirt here. So again, you'd want to put something in between your shirts when you're doing this, so this way you're not seeping to the back of it. But you just want to make sure you're using some sort of paper that isn't absorbent. So again, I used parchment paper. You can use wax paper, but the thing with wax paper is that your design, if you're using a pencil, you're not going to be able to make a design on it as easily. So parchment paper doesn't have that heavy waxing coat. If you have like vellum or something, just any sort of paper that isn't absorbent, like as long as it's not white computer paper, you can probably use it to make a decent stencil with. And you can always experiment with different types of paper too. So as you can see, there's a lot of parts sticking up. That's okay. This is where a brush will serve you a little better than a toothbrush, but I will try with the toothbrush here. So if you have this problem where you're doing a stencil where you have small pieces, all you need to do is make sure when you are doing those small pieces that you are going inwards from where it is folding up. So I would not want to come stroke this way. I would not want to do that because I'm going to end up accidentally going underneath my B here. So, and for tricky parts where you have these two ends here, whoop, I am dripping. Learn from my mistakes. Make sure your brush is not dripping bleach, because you will get it on your shirt where you don't want it, or your fabric.
Michael, on our rubber banded t-shirts that are over there drying, do they stay there until they're totally dry, or?
They don't have to be completely dry. I will, before the end of this, show you mine so you can see. But I would just, give them some time. Probably by 4, if you've already done it, you'll be good to rinse it out. So again, if you have a brush, it will make this a little quicker. Toothbrushes are not the ideal. And for the sake of showing you that this will work, I will So the one bad thing again is that the tape won't stick to this paper. So I had this little mistake here, tried to tape it back up, but the tape doesn't stick. So that's a problem. But I'm not going to do the whole thing. We're going to stop there just so this way you can. And as long as you haven't oversaturated it, it shouldn't really bleed. Outside of where you want. So there is the bee that I made from the original one. Let's see. So any questions from anyone about anything so far? Okay, then we will move on to the final bit. Again, very similar to the batiking, it's just a little bit of a different method. We are going to switch cameras here real quick. This one. So the other thing that you can do, if you want to really try and do something different, is paint with bleach. Say you don't have any dyes, or you don't have any other way to paint in your apartment or house, but you want to paint something, you have some dark fabric, you can always use it like this to paint. So, like I said, chalk always works well. So what this is duck cloth, which is what you typically use whenever you are making a canvas. But canvases are treated, they are sized first, so this way they are steady, and then they are coated with gesso or some sort of undercoat. This is just the raw duck cloth, and essentially I made a board with it. Typically, whenever you're buying like a painting board, it'll be masonite. We don't have masonite, so we used cardboard. So cardboard, and then you want to pull it as tight as you can. I use tape because I don't have any sort of, well, I have one. You can also use a binder clip to get this to stay if you want to take it off the board, or you can glue it onto the board. if you wanted it to be a permanent board art. If you want it to stay on the board like this, then you can, glue it down. I'm just going to leave it as the tape. The tape works just fine. So duck cloth's a little thicker than your t-shirt cloth. It's a little bit more tightly woven. I know this camera is probably not as easy to see, but if you held this up to the light, it definitely would not be as easily see-through as the t-shirt. And the good thing about that is that, one, if it's a colored piece of duck cloth, controlling your bleach will get you a little bit of a different pattern and texture. So this over here is chalk, but I was starting to make a forest scape here. And as you can see with some of my experimenting, there is some light spots that aren't quite what I wanted, but it happened because I went over it a couple times. And then I started controlling it. And now I am starting to do some light spots on the trees where I want the light to come through. Again, it's going to be two-tone or monotone. This might not be as two-tone, as I said. You can get some variation. But this very much is going to be a thing of patience because you're going to need to let it dry in between every layer. And this really does take, I'll show you, a little bit longer if you're using a thicker fabric to show that you've done anything to it. This, you can be a little more liberal with your bleach if you have a thicker fabric. You still want to make sure you're not just slopping it on. Good thing about duck cloth is compared to canvas itself, it is relatively cheap. It's normally when you can go to the store, like $10 a yard at Joann's. Of course, canvases are a little cheaper if you want canvases that are pre-made because they already are sized and gessoed. But because I wanted a raw canvas, this is just fine. So, as you can see, it is just now starting to slightly lighten up. Let me turn the light to here. Yeah, so this really takes some time. Okay, so I'm gonna give that a couple minutes and let's go back to the t-shirt and I will show you that. Okay, so I think this camera will be a little easier to see with. Why is it not moving? Hold on. I think it. Let's go back to this one because it stopped working. So when you're taking the rubber bands off, just set them aside. Again, they're covered with bleach, so don't just set them on something random. So the shirt will still be wet, but it should be absorbed enough now that you can probably wash it off and it'll be okay. So this is what our t-shirt looks like after we've done a spiral pattern on it. And that is what the other side looks like. And so this has finally started to lighten up. Again, because it is thicker, it's a little bit darker. I can keep going. These have a lot more layers of the bleach on them. So this is if you want to get some good light and darks, thicker fabric will do you a lot better. But normally, unless you are trying to paint something as elaborate as a forest scape like this, you probably will not need to have gradients. Won't work so well with the tie-dyeing because you're dumping bleach right on that. You can't really control how unsaturated it is, except for some, accidental happenings. Even with this, there's probably not a lot of variation. Now, there's some spots that are a little lighter, like right here. But those are purely accidental and not something you can control nearly as easily. So that's all I had. Are there any questions for anything?